There can be, Mr. Chairman, no more picturesque sight than our fishermen going about their day's work. For residents and visitors to South Devon, our coastal communities, it is a regular occurrence to see nets cast, pots raised, boats launched and catches landed. It is undoubtedly a familiar view across all of the United Kingdom's coastline, and one that has presumably changed, with the exception of new technology, very little over the last few centuries. For the purpose of this debate, Mr. Chairman, I'm focusing my remarks on the inshore fishing fleets, which I'm defining as those within the 12 nautical mile limit, with vessels generally below 24 metres, and on the basis of the value of the vessel and the gear type. I'm fully aware that there is no specific definition for the inshore fishing fleet, and that one of the few benefits of the Common Fisheries Policy was not to try and provide an exact explanation or definition, but include a 10-metre dividing line for those vessels under which were removed from having sizable administrative burdens placed upon them. Colleagues, of course, may wish to expand upon that definition. As ever, I believe there's significant opportunity for for our coastal communities to do more for our fishermen. Levelling up is not just about creating new opportunities, but shoring up existing and established sectors, such as the fishing industry. If there is to be any purpose to this debate, Mr. Chairman, it is to raise awareness. It is to call for greater clarity and cooperation between DEFRA, the MMO, the MCA, the IFCAs, and our fishermen. And it's to highlight some of the very real and legitimate concerns that are held by the sector towards some of the new regulations, requirements, and technologies that are being foisted upon this noble industry. It is absolutely not too late to make the necessary changes to be able to enhance confidence and certainty. If successful, then the government will have simple wins that will help create jobs, investment, opportunity across the UK's coastal communities, as well as fulfilling part of the National Food Strategy and achieving some of its core levelling up objectives. From the outset, Mr. Chairman, I should make it absolutely clear that I consider the Minister's efforts on behalf of us coastal MPs to be exemplary. She has displayed typical patience and tolerance towards me, and I suspect others, and my weekly and if not daily questions, inquiries on behalf of fishermen of South Devon. I know that there is cross-party support and consensus about her hard work and determination to see this sector flourish. So today's debate and the attendance of right honourable and honourable members from across this House should only strengthen her arm, and I hope she'll be listening carefully to the suggestions that we are making. I'm going to tackle 4 areas, and for members that may want to intervene, this will be the order I'll do it in. First will be the fuel crisis, the second will be the MCA under 15 code, the third is the spatial squeeze, and the fourth is the catch-up and the IVMS. And if I may start with perhaps one of the most serious matters that is facing our fishing sector, is that of the fuel crisis. The recently published Sea Fish Impact Assessment details the rising impact of fuel prices on the fishing sector. It makes for very grim reading and details a step-by-step impact of fuel prices versus the economic viability of UK fishing fleets. After an incredibly difficult 2 years, this shock increase is only likely to sail more fleets into the red and see them suffer operational losses. The worst-case scenario suggests that 2/3 of the UK's fishing fleets might not be able to cover operational costs by income. Even the most optimistic scenario shows only half the fleet's operating profit might drop to negative values. We cannot, Mr. Chairman, underestimate the impact that the fuel price crisis will have on our fishing fleets if the government fails to respond. While there, of course, are steps that individual vessels and skippers can take, from optimising gear and fishing methods, to optimising vessel propulsion systems, to maintenance on vessels and hulls, to operational husbandry on engine and auxiliary engine maintenance. However, this costs money, and whereby businesses might normally be able to ask for investment or source investment, it's proving incredibly difficult at this time due to high prices, poor returns, and a lack of certainty. Can I therefore suggest 2 proposals to mitigate the impact of rising fuel prices on the fishing industry? First, the UK government and DEFRA created the UK Seafood Fund, a £100 million fund set up to support long-term future and sustainability of the UK fisheries and seafood sector. This fund should be repurposed without the need for match funding to help vessels enhance and retrofit their vessels with green technology. Second, The super deduction scheme that was announced in the 2021 budget was a stroke of genius and was applicable for fishing operators to purchase new vessels. However, it did not support the retrofitting and upgrading of vessel machinery to make it greener and more fuel efficient. This ought to be amended to help at this difficult time. I might just anecdotally add to this point, Mr. Chairman, that yesterday I received a message from one of my trawlers in Brixham who had just been out on an 8-day voyage. Because of the rising cost of fuel, they returned after 8 days with the smallest amount of profit they have made in quite some time, which then equated to each of the 8 members of the crew, having been out for 8 days, taking an earning of £32 a day. If we continue on that model, in that direction, our fishing fleets will be totally unsustainable. And at a point where we worry about food security, we will not be able to find that our fishing fleets are going to sea to be able to even help address the food security crises that we are now facing. So could I just ask if the Minister supports the proposals, the 2 suggestions I've just made, and whether or not she'll speak to the Chancellor about them? Can I also ask her whether her department has explored similar emergency schemes such as that launched by the European Union, the EMFAF, and whether or not there are any lessons to be learned from that scheme in the first instance. Mr. Chairman, last year I went to sea on a Brixham trawler. It was an extraordinary opportunity, and I saw firsthand the hard work that it takes to provide fine British seafood for our dinner tables. This year I'm set to head out with the Salcombe crabbers to learn more about their sector. Going to sea comes with the most extraordinary risk, and it's absolutely right that we do nothing to reduce the levels and expectation of safety. Fishing is one of the most dangerous occupations in the UK, and in the last 10 years, there have been tragically 42 deaths on vessels of less than 15 metres. No one here wants to see any loss of life. Safety and security is of vital importance. But there is a concern around the new MCA under 15 safety code, which is causing considerable amounts of consternation and concern for a large number of vessel skippers, owners and crew. Already I understand that the NFFO has raised with the Transport Minister the need for a review around the code's implementations. They've raised a number of points that have also been brought to my attention by the likes of Beshley Poole from the South Devon and Channel Shoal fishermen, and from fishermen in Dartmouth, Brixham, Salcombe and Torbay. These problems include, but of course are not limited to, the role testability assessment, the fact that previously certificated vessels are being asked to alter their original design, that the time frame in conducting these tests is both lengthy and costly, that the language in the code of practice is undeniably complicated and vague, the engagement of surveyors has been poor and failed to reassure those who fear they may lose their jobs, their livelihoods, and indeed their vessels. There are solutions, and the MCA should perhaps revise its role testability assessment to include either the heel test or offset test. Water-freeing arrangements should be considered on a risk-based individual approach by the MCA. The MCA should state a turnaround time for their assessments. A week has been suggested by the NFFO, and I happen to think that to be perfectly reasonable, as do my industry representatives. Improved guidance and consolidated information needs to be written so it can be more easily and understood and implemented. And finally on this point, the MCA should train its surveyors to work in hand with fishermen to understand that these changes have a significant impact on them and their jobs. I say again, no one wants to reduce safety at sea, but we must take fishermen with us rather than bamboozle them and confuse them with nonsensical generalised tests. While I'm positive about the future of fishing in the UK, I'm frequently met by angry, depressed fishermen whose mental health is suffering and in many cases are considering packing it all in. It is ironic that with the current expected changes being forced upon us, there are many taking increased risks working in rougher conditions. That is the exact opposite of what the MCA code is trying to do. There must be better engagement, and when the Minister responded to my letter, which I received yesterday, and I'm very grateful for it, she talked about the cooperation that she had had on this issue, that the MCA had had on this issue with the main UK fishing federations, the RNLI, Seafish, Shipbuilders, Ship Repairers Association, and that there was a roadshow consultation. That's all very, very welcome, but the industry is now pushing back, and we would do well to listen to their very legitimate concerns on this point. So could I ask, and I know it's not specifically her brief and it comes under the Minister for Transport's point, what engagement she has had with the Minister for Transport on this point, and what scope for reform and amendment does the Minister think is available given the sizable pushback from the industry? I'm very keen, as members might know, on the Hampton principles being adopted at every level of government and that we can still maintain safety at sea. Like so much of the government's policy when it comes to the environment, I think we have an incredibly strong record. You only need to look at the fact that 38% of UK waters are now in designated protected areas. This equates to 371 marine protected areas across the UK and says nothing of the highly protected marine areas which will be identified by the end of this year. Like safety, protecting our coastal waters is not just important but a necessity. Well-managed coastal waters are just as an effective carbon sink as anything you might find on land. In fact, I could bore you, Mr. Chairman, for Britain about the role of live bivalve molluscs and the role they play in sequestering carbon and cleaning our waters, but I can assure you that is for another day. The marine protected areas and highly marine protected areas are now more effective in sequestering carbon, but there are now more carbon capture areas, dredging sites, wind farms, and we're only going to squeeze our fishermen into smaller and smaller areas, and as well as encouraging intensification of fishing over smaller ranges. This is a unique example that happened in 2003 in the North Sea, where we shut our waters to demersal fishing to protect spawning cod. The government thought it was doing the right job in 2003, and I'm always delighted to point out the Labour government's flaws. They thought they were doing the right thing, but CFAS and the scientists there thought it did exactly the opposite. So we closed these ranges, and as a result, the cod that we sought to protect was caught immediately after the seasonal closure. The demersal fleet was pushed into another area where immature fish were caught and then subsequently discarded, and the Dutch fleets were pushed into new fishing grounds where they enacted extensive damage to the biodiversity and ecosystems. Historic fishing grounds come with an understanding and a responsibility that fishermen take seriously and understand well as to how to manage. The government must recognise the real-world consequences of squeezing and shutting historic grounds down and the impact that this will have on the industry, but also on fish stocks and our ecosystems. The key is to listen, Mr. Chairman, to the fishermen, their knowledge, and to understand that their knowledge is not born out of guesswork, but daily engagement and understanding, sometimes that has come about over centuries of working in that sector. So I agree with the points that were raised by the NFFO to conduct a careful site-by-site analysis of how conservation objectives for each site could be achieved whilst minimalising the impacts on the fishing industry, to ensure closer dialogue with those who would be affected by management measures, to implement close collaboration in the design of management measures, and to maintain an adaptive approach. If we squeeze our fishing grounds into small areas, we will only send our inshore fishing fleets further out, thereby facing greater danger, rising costs and diminishing fishing grounds. So can I just ask whether or not the Minister recognises that Scotland has found the right balance in this area, and we can learn from their example in this instance? Again, not something I thought I'd be saying, but it is true. Does the Minister also recognise that in some MPAs and HMPAs, fishing can actually assist the enhancement of biodiversity and carbon sequestration? So what exemptions could be allowed to see fishing operations, perhaps in the aquaculture sector, take place in those areas? Finally, Mr. Chairman, technology is a great leveller. We might groan and complain about the advancements, but who amongst us has not seen it improve our lives? And now it is the time for the fishing sector. Both the Inshore Vessel Monitoring System, IVMS, and the Catch app have been well voiced for both the positive and the negative. On the positive side, I recognise the value of these systems. Ultimately, this technology will help improve our data and allow us to maintain our arguments about the responsibility and manner in which our fishermen look after our waters. But the technology shouldn't be feared, but embraced where necessary and when sensible. I happen to believe that this technology is highly relevant for vessels above the 10-metre size. However, I'm totally unsure as to why the government and the MMO are pushing for the smallest, those vessels under 10 metres, to install this technology. Those open-deck vessels are launched from beaches, run the risk of having their equipment stolen, as the devices are fitted and not portable. The issues with signalling that we all experience across our coastal communities is already proving difficult and means that these fishermen fear inadvertently having broken the law and run the risk of fines if they accidentally get it wrong. We forget that across the country, these are not large-scale operations, but individuals and their boats. We must ensure that we're working with them and listening to them. So can I just ask the Minister what, with regards to the IVMS technology, will the Minister please offer an exemption to the under-10s? The deadline is in August. Please do it before then. Not only is the technology expensive, but given the sporadic fishing schedule of the under-10s, that means the IVMS system offers neither good data nor value for money. And as I mentioned earlier, perhaps the only good part of the CFP was their exemption of the under-10s from burdensome requirements. On the subject of money, I now understand there's only one approved supplier of the IVMS technology and that prices have grossly been inflated. The government's offered £650 for the equipment and installation, but all too often installation isn't covered by the £650 grant that we're now offering. So can I just ask on the final few questions here, does the Minister recognise that the prices have been inflated and that installation costs are frequently being added to the £650, and what might we be able to do it on that? And secondly, on enforcement, I understand that the data collected will be interpreted by the local inshore fisheries and conservation agencies, the IFCAs, but that there is no national standard or procedure in place to ensure that they act appropriately with the use of data and in proportion and in a consistent manner. Can the Minister clarify this and say that there is a national response? On the catch-up, I wrote recently to the MMO about the need to address some of the concerns around this. It does now seem from the response that I've had from Mr. Michael Coyle on this that we have a system that actually will allow people to be able to enter their catch to the nearest port to where they land rather than the actual port if it's not listed on the app. A 10% margin of tolerance will be accepted, and that the catch app can record the data offline and transmit when back in signal. These are positive steps and have provided some reassurance to people who were deeply worried that they were going to be penalised and fined as a result. Simple though it must sound, we must improve communication and we must ensure that the MMO, DEFRA and fishermen are working together in a collaborative approach that reassures them in this manner. Mr. Chairman, I'm often accused of speaking only about fishing, and I'm sorry not to have disabused people of that view, but I'm very proud of the fishing community I have in my patch. I see the value and what they achieve in South Devon. I know that they have an enormous opportunity to play in levelling up our coastal communities and ensuring that actually jobs, investment, training and skills can all come in the right direction, in the right place. But I might just finish on this because I suspect your patience has worn out with me, Mr. Chairman. I leave you with the final cast. Our land and seas can look after us, but only if we listen to those who know it best, who for centuries have toiled the land and sailed the seas. Now, at a time of great need, we would do well to place our faith and support in those who can address the many challenges that we face. Thank you.